All right, let's dive right in. If you've ever tried to learn Mandarin, you know that pronunciation can be an absolute beast. Well, today we're going to tackle one of the biggest hurdles head-on. We're going to demystify the tones and all those subtle sounds that make the difference between a smooth conversation and a very confusing one.
And yes, believe it or not, this can actually happen. This quote just perfectly captures why getting Mandarin pronunciation right is so important. A tiny, tiny slip in your pitch can lead to some seriously hilarious or at least very awkward moments. The key to avoiding these kinds of mix-ups, it all comes down to understanding something called minimal pairs.
So, what are these minimal pairs? Basically, they're words that, to an untrained ear, can sound almost identical. The only difference might be a slight change in pitch, a tiny puff of air, or even just the way you curl your tongue. But here's the kicker. That single small difference completely changes the meaning of the word. Mastering these is, without a doubt, the foundation of clear communication.
To really get a handle on all this, it helps to think of Mandarin as a kind of music. And like any piece of music, it's made up of some core components. Every single syllable you'll ever say is built on a really simple three-part structure.
Every syllable in pinyin is built from just these three parts. First, you've got the initial, which is just the starting consonant, like the b in bao. Then comes the final. That's the vowel sound that follows, like the ao. And finally, the real star of our show today, the tone. That's the pitch pattern that gets layered over the whole syllable. You get these three things right, and you've absolutely nailed the sound.
And here they are, the famous four main tones. Each of these little marks represents a very specific journey for your voice. The first one is high and level. The second one rises up, almost like you're asking a question. The third one does this little dip down before coming back up. And the fourth is just a sharp, decisive fall. Seriously, these little marks are your entire roadmap to meaning.
This right here is the power of tones in action. Let's take the classic example, the syllable ma. With that high flat tone, ma, it means mother. Change to a rising tone, ma, and now you're talking about hemp. With that dipping tone, ma, you get horse. And with the sharp falling tone, ma, it means to scold. One sound, four completely different worlds. It's wild.
But, as absolutely critical as tones are, they aren't the only pitfall you have to watch out for. There are other minimal pairs that can trip you up, and these often involve really subtle differences in how you use your breath and your tongue.
This is a classic one. Aspiration. All that means is the difference between releasing a strong puff of air and, well, not. For example, bao, which means to run, is aspirated. You can feel that little puff of air. But bao, meaning bag, is unaspirated. To an English speaker, they might sound kind of like our P and B, but in Mandarin, the real distinction is all about the airflow.
And hey, here's a super simple, practical way you can test this for yourself. Go on, grab a piece of tissue. When you say the aspirated sounds like P, T, or K, that tissue should flutter. But for their unaspirated counterparts like B, D, and G, it should barely move at all. It's a fantastic way to get instant feedback.
Another key difference is all about your tongue position. For these retroflex sounds, like zh, you have to curl the tip of your tongue back toward the roof of your mouth. But for alveolar sounds, like z, your tongue stays flat right behind your teeth. This tiny change makes all the difference between G, to know, and Z, capital. Okay, so you've learned the tones, you're practicing your consonants, but then you listen to native speakers, and something just sounds different. Well, that's because there are secret rules that govern how tones actually change when you're speaking naturally.
This is the perfect example. If you've learned that ni and hao are both third tones, you might be totally confused when you hear people say ni hao. So why does that first tone change? Well, there's a fantastic reason for it. This whole phenomenon is called tone syndy, and it's not about being lazy with pronunciation. It's a fundamental part of the language that just evolved to make certain combinations easier and more natural to say. Without it, some phrases would sound really clunky and slow. And this right here is the most common rule. When two third tones show up back-to-back like in ni hao, the first one just transforms into a second rising tone. Why? Honestly, it just flows better. So the kind of clunky ni hao becomes a smooth, fluid ni hao. Mastering this one rule will instantly make your Mandarin sound so much more natural.
So knowing the rules is one thing, but how do you actually build these skills? Well, it takes a dedicated toolkit for practice, one that trains both your mouth and your ears.
The best practice is really a feedback loop. You've got to drill your tone pairs over and over. Then imitate native speakers. Try to shadow them in podcasts and videos. Definitely use that tissue test to check your aspiration. But also, listen actively. When you hear Chinese, really focus on the tones. And this one is crucial. Even if it feels a bit awkward, record yourself. Comparing your pronunciation to native audio is the fastest way to figure out what needs work. And finally, if you can, get feedback from a real person. It just closes that loop perfectly.
And this is the ultimate goal. It's not about never making a mistake. It's about developing an internal ear that can actually catch those mistakes as you're making them. When you can hear your own errors and fix them on the fly, that's when you know you're truly on the path to fluency.
And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? We often think of pronunciation as a purely physical skill, training our mouth and tongue. But maybe the real challenge and the greater reward is retraining our brains to hear a whole new landscape of sound. It turns out, mastering Mandarin isn't just about learning to speak, it's about learning a completely new way to listen.